Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is the CARES Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Fund and Private Nonprofit Equitable Services Training. In this training, we have private nonprofit school officials and local education agency, LEA, school officials that are joining us today. In addition, we may have some consultants that provide direct assistance, not only to private schools, but also to the LEAs. My name is Lenny Tregues, and I will be starting this session. I work at TEA, and I am the private nonprofit ombudsman. This presentation is intended solely to provide general information and guidance to Texas LEAs and reflects the Texas Education Agency's current understanding of the CARES Act and applicable federal guidance. The content of this presentation is subject to change as a result of further potential information and guidance provided by federal agencies with regulatory oversight of CARES Act programs. This presentation does not constitute legal advice, and LEAs and PNPs are therefore advised to seek legal counsel regarding the information and guidance provided in this presentation before acting on such information and guidance. One of the things that we will cover today is the CARES Act, the ESSER, ESSER, PNP eligibility. We will discuss consultation with the LEA and the private school. I'll talk about how a district calculates the proportionality share for the CARES Act to provide services to the private school, and show you a draft of the private school schedule in which that information is captured for TEA. I will also go over the use of funds for the CARES Act, which is can be different from the ESSA, which is the Every Student Succeeds Act statute, that it has a different set of rules for using funds. And then I'll go over quite a few of the CARES frequently asked questions. And as I said at the top of the session, there will be some CARES questions that I will not be able to answer because all new questions must go through our leadership task force before a response will be made available. And so I appreciate those that are entering questions on the Slido, and you'll have the link on the bottom of the rest of the slides. And any questions that are not answered will go through our leadership task force so that it can be publicly posted on the TEA website. I'll talk about my role as the ombudsman and then also share resources with you that are available. There is a big debate about the CARES Equitable Services Act and the Every Student Succeeds Act. And this is the stance of the Texas Education Agency. Until and if Congress or the federal courts require that the U.S. Department of Education change its present guidance, Texas will follow that guidance in order to ensure that critically needed federal funds are not jeopardized through non-compliance. At the bottom of your screen, you will see questions, www.slido.com. The event code that you enter is PNP CARES, C-A-R-E-S. At any time during this presentation, you can submit questions under the IENTS Q&A. You may also log your attendance under live poll heading. You will type in your attendance record, your full name, and your role as a PNP, an LEA, consultant, vendor, or TEA staff member. I first want to talk about the two funds that we will be that are under the CARES Act. First is the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Act. That one it's under the umbrella of CARES in Section 18002. It provides emergency support to LEAs, emergency support to institutes of higher education, and may provide support to any other education-related entity. At this time, we do not have more information about the GEAR Fund, but we will be discussing today specifically the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, which I will call ESSER as we go through this session. That is the fund that we will specifically reference for the private nonprofit equitable services under the CARES Act, and that is in Section 18003 of the CARES Act. I want to define what a CARES non-public school is, because it's very specific in the CARES ESSER Act how to define a private nonprofit elementary or secondary school that could receive services. The first part of the definition is that the school must be accredited or licensed or operating in accordance with Texas state law. So the school does not have to be accredited if it is a private school that is licensed. So accreditation does not have to be a requirement in as long as one of the three here are met and the school existed prior to March 13th, 2020. If the school is a brand new private nonprofit school that opened up after on March 13th or later, it will not be eligible for CARES equitable services. In addition, it must be a private nonprofit school. The burden of proof lies on the private nonprofit school to provide the LEA with documentation that they are accredited or licensed or operating in accordance with Texas state law, that they were in existence prior to March 13th, and that they are labeled as a private nonprofit school. If a private school cannot show documentation for those things, then they would not be able to participate with the CARES Equitable Services Act. The CARES Act actually goes back and refers to the Every Student Succeeds Act as Section 1117. That particular section discusses the consultation process for providing equitable services to private nonprofit schools. And so even though that is referenced, it's referencing merely the consultation section. Services must still be secular, neutral, and non-ideological, which means there can be no religious content that is shared through any of the materials, equipment, and property that are purchased with the CARES funding for use in equitable services. The services must be timely, starting as soon as they are able to start. And with everything going the way it is with the new virus and schools that are closed down, not only LEAs, but also private nonprofits being closed on site, and some that will open and some may open a little later, and services could be virtually, which we will talk about a little later. It could be a little time before equitable services get started. And so I'm asking for the private nonprofit schools to have a little bit more patience this year as LEAs tackle the new law, the understanding of what CARES is, and everyone restarts school back in the fall. And so it may be a little bit longer before the LEA is able to contact you with what can be provided, and set up consultation meetings. And so just have a little patience if you have not heard from your LEA. They actually were just trained last week on the CARES Act. And so it's brand new to them. It's brand new to everyone. And so thank you in advance for your patience as we work through what the law means and what can be done with the law under the CARES Act. It is not required that the CARES Act offer supplemental services, which is unlike our Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, which must be supplemental. And what that means is if something was purchased in the past with state, local, or private school funds, you would be able to, the LEA would be able to use the CARES Act funding to be able to purchase those items again for equitable services without it being a issue, because you do not have to offer supplemental services under CARES. As far as the LEA and private nonprofit consultation process, the LEA is the one that must initiate the consultation process. And so even though many of your private schools have already reached out to the LEAs to get additional information, as I said earlier, it will take a little bit of time for the LEAs, for some of the LEAs to be able to start that consultation process. In the meantime, LEAs will start to reach out to private schools. Some of you have already had consultation meetings. Others are waiting on that process. LEAs will reach out to private schools that have participated in the past and in any federal program. They will also try and reach new schools that have opened that they may not know about through newspaper ads, school posters, by posting things on their website, by posting documents at the library. Those are some of the ways in which a district is trying to locate new or current private schools that have opened. In addition, in some of the rural areas, some of the ways that the district may try and contact a private school is by posting announcements and posters in gas stations, post offices, laundromats, corner stores. Those are just some of the examples that a district may try and reach a private school. If you are a private school that has not participated in the past with an LEA, it is okay for you to contact the district and just let them know who the contact person is at the school with your email and phone number, so that if they have not reached that point of scheduling consultation, they will at least have your name and contact information on the list. So when they are able to start that outreach, they will be able to reach you directly. The LEA is required to provide equitable services only to those private schools within their boundaries under the CARES ESSER Act, which is different from the Every Student Succeeds Act. And so if you are a private school that is located within a district boundary, that would be your district that you would seek to request a meeting for consultation to see what equitable services you would qualify for. The LEA does not reach out with this particular fund to private schools that are outside of its boundaries. They will be required to provide equitable services in the same manner as they would under the Every Student Succeeds Act in Section 1117, although there may be different uses of funds, which we will discuss a little bit later in regards to the CARES Act. The consultation with the private school must occur before the LEA submits their CARES ESSER application, which is August 24th. That is the date in which they must submit the application to our agency, Texas Education Agency. So you will hear something from the district before August 24th as a private school. At that time, before application submission, they must discuss what is the design and development that the private school would like to have with the CARES equitable services. The district and the private school must work towards a goal of agreement. And so that means that there may be times that both sides have to give a little, as long as it is under the parameters of what the CARES Act can provide and what is legally available. They must provide the equitable and effective services. And one thing I will say is the best way to start off this consultation meeting and even the contact between the district and the LEA is to start out providing a friendly outreach, as well as the private schools providing the information that the LEA may need in order to determine which services are going to be provided under the CARES Act. If there are any disagreements between the LEA and the private school, the district must provide written rationale of what those disagreements are to the private school. And so that should be a conversation that occurs during consultation. And the private school does have a right to have the rationale of what the disagreements are and why. The LEA would provide you that information so that you would know. The final decisions still are the decisions of the LEA. Even though the LEA and the private school are working together, it's important to note that the LEA, as the fiscal agent that receives the funds, is the one that has the final authority on what services will be provided to a private school. However, I will say that there are a list of allowable services that can be provided, and so the LEA should be working with the private school and trying to meet the needs of the private school. Consultation may be provided virtually, which has been done by some districts and private schools already. And so that is a possibility to be able to meet. The district is responsible for keeping attendance records and meeting notes when that consultation occurs, because that would be part of an audit in the event that the Texas Education Agency or the U.S. Department of Ed did a program audit of their consultation or their experience, their requirements of the CARES Act with a private school. They must keep dated documentation on file as an LEA. The private schools should have those as well. And as I stated, the remote attendance records, any agendas, meeting materials and notes, all of those must be dated by the LEA and kept on file in the event of an audit. That there will be a CARES affirmation of consultation form that will be made available, and it is different from the ESSA affirmation of consultation form. During the consultation, here are some of the things that the LEA must discuss with the private school. The most important thing is what is the service delivery in which the private schools will receive those services. The LEA talks about how it must keep control of the actual CARES Act ESSER funds and retain ownership and title to all equipment, materials, and property. And so even though a private school may have access to use equipment and property during the source of the loan, during the extent of the CARES Act, it cannot retain any of those items. And so that's one of the things that a private school and an LEA must think about moving forward, because even though items may be purchased that are on the allowable list, it does not mean that the private school will get to keep those items or materials. The LEA may provide direct services to the private school, or they may use a third-party contractor to provide those services. It must be a good faith effort by the LEA to contact all the private schools within their boundaries. And as I said earlier, there could be new schools that the private school would not, or the LEA would not even know existed. But they must show to the Texas Education Agency that they did make a good faith effort in attempting to reach all the private schools within their boundaries. And that is why they will use some of the methods that I described earlier. There will be a specific CARES Act ESSER PNP affirmation of consultation form that will be available July 1. It will be posted on our website. It is not due until September 30th. So if a district has already provided consultation with the private school regarding the CARES Act, they can come back later and sign the form, and then that form will be uploaded, will be submitted by the LEA to our agency no later than September 30th. So even if you had the consultation, you will receive this form as a private school and need to sign off on it that the district did go over all of the items that are on there. And the district will sign off, and you both should keep copies in your files. Now I'm going to speak a little bit about how we calculate shares for the CARES Equitable Services Act. First of all, the CARES funding should be obligated for equitable services during this next school year. It will be based on the district and the private schools K-12 total enrollment. And when we say K-12 total enrollment, that means ages 5 through 17 at the snapshot of the enrollment date in which you're using. The district and the private school will decide which date of enrollment they will be using during consultation to look at those students that are ages 5 through 17 and count those students to calculate the equitable share. The LEA count to calculate the CARES equitable share under our department was October of 2019. So it is possible for a private school to use October of 2019 date or a different date. They don't have to use the same date that the LEA is using to share their ages of 5 through 17 that are actually posted that will be used. The ESSA statute, section 1117 C1, and also in our ESSA funding reference manual, which you will have access to that. It's on our website. Both of those documents are the provides the written information of ages 5 through 17. A lot of districts and private schools did not realize they could not count pre-K students for total enrollment to calculate shares. In order to calculate the shares, you must use ages 5 through 17, but that does not mean you cannot provide services for preschoolers if they are in a building that has another grade at a private school. It cannot be a nursery to preschool private nonprofit school. They cannot receive services. But if it was a nursery to grade 2 private nonprofit school, they would be able to provide services for the pre-K students, but still the total enrollment to calculate those services are only going to capture ages 5 through 17. And I know I've spent a lot of time on this particular slide, and it's because I received so many questions on the ages. The number one difference with the CARES ESSER Act is that it is not based on poverty data. So the LEA does not need to find out what the poverty data is for the private school. They only need to find out the total enrollment of all private schools that are participating within their district, ages 5 through 17. If there are 5 private schools within the LEA's district and only 3 of them want to participate with the CARES Act equitable services, the district will only collect the total enrollment for the 3 out of the 5 private schools that are participating. I know this is a little blurry on your screen, but you will be able to see the actual form a little bit later. It is posted on the TEA website, the application. But this is sharing what the private nonprofit section looks like for the LEAs that have to submit an application. And so one of the things that the LEAs are first asked is, are there private nonprofit schools that are located within its boundaries? If the answer is yes, then they move to the next question. Are there private nonprofit schools that are participating in the CARES Act? If the answer is yes, then that's when they complete the rest of the section that will help generate equitable services for those participating private schools. If there are no private schools located within the district's boundaries, or if there are no private schools that will participate with the CARES Act, the district will not need to complete the rest of the private school section. They will need to select assurances to say that the LEA is providing equitable services based on the CARES Act to those private nonprofit students and teachers that are participating, and that it will provide an affirmation of consultation to those private schools for signature that will be submitted to the ombudsman by the timeline requested, which is September 30th. This gives a snapshot of how the LEA will determine what the private school reservation for ESSER will be. And this is going to calculate the equitable services for all participating private schools within that district. And so as you can see here, they're first entering those participating school students ages 5 through 17 for the LEA in the private school. Once they get that, that is going to show them what the total enrollment is that they will use to calculate the per pupil amount for services. And so the district will enter what their ESSER allocation amount is, and then it will show what the total per pupil amount is for not only the private school, but also the LEA. And then at the bottom, you will see it's going to calculate what the total is. So if, going back to the previous example, if there were 3 of the private schools that were participating out of 5, it's going to show you what the reservation is, the total for those 3 participating private schools. And so what I'm going to do is share an example to put some numbers to the screen so that you can see how these services are actually calculated with real numbers. If the LEA received $75,000 under the CARES ESSER fund, and the LEA has, which is the public school students, has 1,500 students ages 5 through 17, and then the participating private schools have a total of 500 students within the district that are ages 5 through 17. That gives us a total of 2,000 students that will help to generate the CARES ESSER fund share. And so what a district is going to look at is what is the proportional share percentage of public school students. So the 1,500 students represent 75% of the 2,000 student total. And the private school represents 25% of the 2,000 total enrollment. When you calculate the percentage, then that gives you the dollar amount. And so here, excuse me, you will see that the public school, they have 75% of the students, so they will receive 75% of the funding to use in the public school, which is $56,250. For the private school, since they have 25% of their students that are participating, they will receive 25% of that $75,000 total to use across the participating schools, which equals $18,750 in equitable services. So if there were the 3 schools that were participating, then they would have the $18,750 to share. And so what I'm going to show you next is this is the written steps for calculating. Let me go to this and then I'll go back to the other slide. This slide shows how you determine the per pupil proportional share. So you see the participating private nonprofit schools have generated $18,750 in equitable services. So to divide it among the 3 schools, they will calculate $37.50 for the students that are participating at each school. And that's how you will know how much each participating campus will be receiving by taking that per pupil amount. So for example, if the first school, private school, has 100 students ages 5 through 17 that are participating, then they are going to take that $37.50, multiply it times 100 students, and that will be their equitable share. And as you look at the equitable share, calculating what the private school would receive for equitable share, the LEA may take administration from the equitable services, but it must be discussed during consultation. It must be reasonable and necessary. And LEA has a threshold in which they must not exceed when they're discussing administration from equitable services to provide the services to the private school. They're going to use the per pupil amount, which is here. This is how you can see how it is calculated. If a district and a private school agrees to pool the CARES ESSER funds, which means those 3 private schools that I used as an example, if they decided they wanted to combine their funds to receive services across the 3 schools instead of having the funding separate for services at each school, then they would need to agree upon that during consultation, and the equitable services would be provided within those 3 schools based on need. Okay. A lot of questions come up about where can I find the CARES ESSER grant amounts that the district is going to receive in my area. And so what I have done is indicated on this page where you will find that information. It is on our TEA website, and you will go to our FAQ side for the CARES ESSER page, and the arrow is showing it's going to be under 2019-2020 CARES entitlement amounts by LEA. One thing to caution you about as a private school, this gives the CARES amount for the entire district. It is not going to show what the equitable services are for your specific private school campus. That is something that the LEA will work with you and show you the calculations by way of formula, in which I shared the example earlier. And so they will be able to give you what the calculation is by school. But you can look, it's public knowledge on how much funding each district has received for the CARES Act. And so this is an example of what that form looks like when you click on the entitlement to see how a district is what a district is receiving for the CARES ESSER fund. And so, for example, here you can see that the Coleman ISD, which is in Region 15, has generated $243,757 for the CARES Act. And so that funding is just showing this is their district total for all of their public school districts. Then they look at which private schools, if any, are going to participate, and then they start breaking it down by the private nonprofit equitable share, and then the private nonprofit individual share by campus. At this time, I'm going to stop and take questions, a few of the questions that have come in through the Slido. And if you have not registered your attendance, please do so. It's also at Slido, www.slido.com. And then you will put in event code PNP Cares, and you would need to register your attendance, your name, and your role. So I will go through some of the questions that are here. The slides will be available to those who have registered for this session following the meeting. They will need to go through TEA leadership, but it should be a very quick turnaround that you should be able to receive that by the end of the week. I will talk about allowable uses a little bit later. I see there are a lot of questions on that. There is a question asking when we collect enrollment data from the district and private schools, what date do we use to determine when you're looking at those ages 5 through 17? And that is going to be a decision you make during consultation. Whatever date you use must be consistent. I have a question. Are homeschools considered private schools? In the state of Texas, homeschools are considered private schools, but they are not considered a private nonprofit school unless they are meeting, unless they have documentation to support that they have a 501c3. So due to that reason, and most of the homeschools do not have a private nonprofit status, they would not be eligible for the CARES Act funding or any other federal funding for services. Someone asked if the webinar is limited in attendees. The webinar is, but you check your mail because they did send out a YouTube link for people to join the YouTube. The webinar is being shared with private nonprofits as well as local education agencies and consultants. As a PNP, they would need to provide documentation to an LEA to show that they are licensed or operating as a private school, accredited private school. They would have to provide the documentation to the LEA. If a private school cannot provide that documentation, then they will not be able to receive services under the CARES Act. There's a question about private nonprofit preschools. Private nonprofit preschools will not be able to receive services. The only services that can be provided with the CARES funding are going to be services to private schools that have more than one grade level. They have preschool plus a grade level. So if they are a preschool, nonprofit preschool that goes up to age 5, then they could use services for the 4 and 5-year-olds. However, one of the things that I want to caution the private schools in, if there are multiple private schools that are requesting services from the LEA, it may, as a private school, they will need to look at what is the priority within the school and what is going to benefit the students and the teachers. And so it may not benefit the private school to use services for preschool. It may be more beneficial to use services for students who are age 5. So that's a decision that you would, that is a conversation you would have with the district during the consultation. Homeschool are not eligible for the CARES Act funding. If the consultation for the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, has already been completed, the private school can expect to hear from the district for a consultation specific to the CARES Act. If the private school has not had consultation at all, it may be that the district will provide consultation to the private school over the LEA, over the ESSA and the CARES Act at the same time. That is permissible. However, the LEA must label documents to show this is the conversation and documentation for the ESSA consultation, and this is the documentation for the private nonprofit CARES Act consultation. So there has to be documentation to share for both of the statutes. One of the things to remember is that the LEA's application is not due to TEA until August 24th. And due to that timing, what I want to say is that as a private school, you may not hear from your LEA this month. It could be July when they start setting up their consultation meetings, or even early August. They just have to consult before they submit their August 24th application. So it may be delayed a little while. And as I said earlier, just have a little patience. with them so that they can get time to not only see how they're going to provide services within their school, but the private school is also looking at how they're going to provide educational services to their students. And so that's one of the things that you will be looking at. The CARES affirmation will be submitted by the LEA in the same manner in which it is submitted currently by LEAs, but it will be under the CARES Affirmation Act heading. There is a question about the date of September 30th. For the date of September 30th is the deadline for the CARES affirmation of consultation to be submitted. The question is, may items be procured prior to the opening of school or school attendance, which is set for August? That is something that you will discuss with the private school. And yes, there is an FAQ under the CARES Act private nonprofit, and I'll show you where that is a little bit later. But there is an FAQ to say that services may be provided as you look back till March 13th until. So you can purchase items for, as an LEA, for the private school to begin using in August, even though the affirmation may not be signed. But by that time, your consultation meeting will have already occurred by August 24th. And again, you may need time in order to order supplies and materials. So it may not be there at the very beginning of the school year. Someone asked why does the age limit end at 17? And that's because ages 5 through 17 is in the statute. So that's not in our control on providing services for those students in that age group or the enrollment numbers. May a private nonprofit send student enrollment numbers, or do they need to send individual student names and ages? The LEA does need to know that they can verify the student enrollment numbers, ages 5 through 17. And so you may have, as a PNP, the LEA to ask you for a list of student names and their ages or date of birth. They can look at that in the private school office. They may ask to see that later, but the LEA is required to ensure that whatever number the private school is giving them for students ages 5 through 17, that number is correct, because the LEA is the fiscal agent. And in the event that the LEA has an audit by our office or by the U.S. Department of Ed, they will need to prove to the auditors that they did verify that enrollment number was correct. The private schools, all the private schools in the district do not need to use the same date as all the other private schools for enrollment. That's one of the questions. So you could have private schools using different dates of enrollment, but then you combine those numbers as a district to put what the private nonprofit total enrollment is, ages 5 through 17. And that may be a different date than what the LEA is using, but that needs to be in consultation with the LEA. "18-year-old seniors will not count in the total enrollment for calculating services." One of the questions I get a lot is if there is a private school that is not in the district boundaries, The LEA does not include them, even if some of the students that reside within the district boundaries attend. For CARES, you're only going to count the private school building total enrollment ages 5 through 17, regardless of where they live. So if you have 100% of your students live in the district boundaries, but 100% of those students go to a private school outside of your boundaries, you would have 0 for total private school numbers within your districts, because there are no students, that private school is not within your boundaries, and you have all of your students that reside in the districts actually attending a private school outside of your district boundaries. And you're only going to be looking at the private schools that actually attend the private schools that actually are participating with CARES are the only students that you're going to be counting. Okay. I'm going to continue on with the use of funds. And again, if you have not registered your attendance, please go to Slido with the event code PMP Cares. Click on the live poll that will give you the attendance sheet and fill that in. If you have questions, you may put it under the audience Q&A. Okay, here are the allowable services. I'm going to go through these. There are specifically 12 allowable services under the CARES Act, and that's it. So you must fall within one of the 12 in order to receive equitable services as a private school, as well as the LEAs must fall within these services for using funding under the CARES Act. The first one is any activity that's authorized under the Every Student, under the ESEA, the IDEA, Adult Education and Family Literacy, Perkins Career and Technical Education Act, and McKinsey-Vento Homeless. Any activity that is authorized under those particular statutes are authorized for a private nonprofit school. In addition, another allowable service would be, equitable service would be coordinating with agencies to prevent, prepare, and respond to the virus. And so that might be coordinating with a local health department, mental health department, other agencies that may help the school prepare for opening in order to start the school year in the fall. A private school can use equitable services for that. They may also use services to receive resources for the principals and teachers to address student needs. And as you're looking at these, even though the CARES Act is very broad in what some of the allowable services could be, what you should be looking at as a school is what is the priority that you need within your private school or within your LEA. Activities to address the unique needs of students. So for example, do you have low-income students, children with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, students that are experiencing homelessness or foster care youth? You may provide services to address any of those students' unique needs. You may also use equitable services to develop procedures to improve your response efforts and preparedness. as school gets started, as well as professional development and training for staff. And so when you look at the training and professional development for staff, that's going to be for any of the participating private schools if they have a need. And so the private schools should be looking at what are their most, what are the priority needs that they have in their school to use the CARES funding for equitable services. That is what they should be looking at. What data supports that? You may purchase sanitizing and cleaning supplies for as we are returning back to school. However, you may not purchase, as a private school, you may not pay the salary of a custodian or janitorial services to use those supplies. However, you can purchase the supplies. As you're coordinating and planning for any additional long-term closures or the closures that have just occurred, looking at the student meals, yes, you can use equitable services for online services through the use of technology, providing that education technology for students. That is something that the CARES funding may be used for. However, the one thing that I want to remind the private schools of, if the LEA provides educational devices, technology devices, all devices will return to the LEA at the end of the grant. So these devices that may be used either on-site or for online educational services, they must be returned at the end of the grant. It is not something that the private nonprofit school may be able to keep. And the educational technology would include hardware and software connectivity for students who are being served by the LEA. It may also include assistive technology or adaptive equipment for students. In addition, if the private nonprofit school wants to provide mental health services and support through bringing in counselors or mental health specialists to address not only their students but their staff, then they can use the CARES Act for those services, as well as any summer and after school programs. And that would be for all participating students in those participating private schools and activities to continue education services. One of the questions that I have received is, must the private school have participated in the past with equitable services? And the answer is no to that. A private school may have never participated with private school equitable services. And if that is the case, then they can still qualify for CARES equitable services. A private school does not need to be accredited to receive the funds. It must meet, on the first few slides, it must meet those eligibility criteria in order to receive equitable services, which is it must be accredited or licensed or otherwise operating in accordance with Texas state law and in existence prior to March 13th, 2020, and it must be a private profit school in order to participate with these services. Okay, now I'm going to discuss a little bit about the CARES equitable funding. Here's one of the questions. Will the CARES ESSER funding have the same lifespan as Title I Part A. This is already an FAQ in a posted document that we have under CARES. The grant is separate from the Title I Part A funds. And the CARES ESSER grant, the period for that grant is May 15th, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. And so this means the district may use services for the private school from March 13th, 2020 through September 30th, 2022. And I bring that up because when going back to any equipment, property, supplies, materials that are purchased during the school year for equitable services, all of those items must be returned by September 30th, 2022, unless the private school closes prior to that date, in which it must notify the LEA that it is closing. Maybe it's only going to be in session for this next school year. Then they would need to ensure that those items are returned to the LEA before closure. Is a private nonprofit school whose students and teachers receive equitable services a recipient of federal financial assistance? And the answer is no. They're not a recipient of federal financial assistance because the public district or another public agency that's contracted must control and administer the funds for services. No funds may go directly to a private nonprofit school. So a private nonprofit school may not pay salaries for teachers or hire teachers. It is something that the LEA must provide those services because a private school may not use dollars under the CARES Act. As I stated earlier, the LEA is the one that is responsible for initiating contact with the private school to start sharing in the consultation process and working on what services will be provided. Even though most of the private schools have contacted LEAs, again, just be patient as they work to get everything ready and ensure they understand the LEA application that they have to submit to TEA. And I assure you they will make the time to have the consultation with the private schools located within their district by August 24th when they submit the application. An LEA may not provide expense reimbursement to private schools. The Coronavirus Relief Fund is one that the LEAs are eligible for, but the private schools are not. The ESSER funds may not be used for school construction. And again, anything that is purchased with Equitable Services CARES funding will need to be returned to the LEA at the end of the grant. So for example, I've had a lot of questions about touchless water fountains, sinks, touchless toilets, touchless soap dispensers. The question is, can those be provided with CARES funds? No, because at the end of the life of the grant, the touchless toilets, the touchless sinks, the touchless soap dispensers will need to be pulled out of the private school. So that would not be an expense that a private school should be using the equitable services for, because you're not going to be able to keep it. All the property, equipment, and supplies are the property of the LEA. May a private school use equitable services for laptops, electronics, hotspots for program eligible students with the CARES Act. Yes, under the current pandemic circumstances, and it's under the Every Student Succeeds Act and the ESSER CARES Equitable Service Funds. They may be used to purchase this technology for secular, which is non-religious, instructional purchases. Keeping in mind that all of those things will need to be returned at the end of the grant to the LEA. The LEA keeps the title, internal control, and monitors the use of the technology for non-religious uses. And so the LEA will need to set up some type of internal control to ensure that the private school staff and students are not using whatever that item is for religious purposes. They may ask you to sign an assurance as a private school to assure that you're not going to use the items in that particular manner. They may have software that they run on the computers to ensure that only certain software can be on that particular computer, certain educational software. It is up to the district to make that decision on the internal controls that they have in order to meet the compliance of that particular item. Our CARES Act ESSER funds for current participating private schools or any private schools in the school boundary zones, can they be used? They're only going to be used for the private nonprofit schools located within the school district boundaries that are requesting to participate with services. Will the carryover of CARES ESSER funds for private nonprofit equitable services be allowed? I'm already receiving that question, even though the funds are not even available. Or the application for the LEA has not even been submitted. Carryover was not addressed in the USDE's guidance. And so we are waiting on guidance about the CARES carryover. However, in the past, USDE has always stated that a private school, as well as the LEA, should attempt to spend funding for services during the current school year. So it's not for districts and private schools to just try and hold on to that funding for services until the following year. There are times when a private school will decline to participate in a program or not respond to the LEA's request for consultation at the very beginning of the school year. Or it could be that during the school year, they decide to decline and they have not used any of the equitable services for during the school year yet. If they decline or do not respond to the LEA has no further responsibility in providing equitable services to that school during the school year. And I apologize for the typo, that will be corrected. However, the LEA must be able to demonstrate that it made a good faith effort to contact all the private schools within its district. Okay, I'm going to go to some questions. That have been entered through Slido. Again, if you have not entered your attendance, please do so under the active poll. There's a question that asks, since we're allowed to reimburse public schools for teachers as an LEA during the pandemic, are we also allowed to reimburse private schools? Private schools cannot receive funding However, I do know that that question has been submitted to USDE for a response, but the statute always talks about services and not funding. Are private schools allowed to pay for COVID-19 tests and thermometers with the CARES Act funds? We do not have the answer to that particular question. That question will need to go through our task force. As well as COVID testing for teachers and staff. That will need to go through our task force. Will regional educational service centers be offering PMP a shared services option similar to the ESSA? That would be a topic for discussion during your consultation with the private school and between the private school and the LEA to know if that will be something that will be an option. The CARES fund, that ESSER fund that I'm discussing now, does not specifically address or impact IDEA funds. Since the CARES grant requests a consultation date, is it safe to assume LEAs can have one consultation meeting for all interested private schools? The LEAs can decide to have one open meeting for consultation purposes if they have a large group of private schools. However, going over your individual campus needs, that would be a decision in which you work with the LEA for the consultation on that. But it is very possible that an LEA or an educational service center may pull private schools in to talk about just the overview of what is the CARES Act, how can equitable services be used, so that they can get that information out there for everyone to hear it. But as always, private schools can contact the district for individual questions, and you will meet with them either during that time as a side-by-side conversation to discuss consultation and what you will need as an individual private school. Okay, there's a question about for LEAs. Some LEAs will submit their application June 30th. Would they need to have a stamp-in date to utilize CARES funds for 1920? That is a question that they would have they would need to speak with the grants administration department, with their negotiator. As an LEA, they would be able to assist you on that. The CARES affirmation will be made available July 1st. And I've already discussed schools will need to return all equipment, supplies, and property at the end of the CARES grant cycle, which is September 30th of 2022. As far as technology equipment and supplies, the question is, does it need to be picked up every year? If there is not a use for the equipment and supplies during the summer that has at the private school and that equipment is there, the LEA would need to ensure that the equipment is secured And that is a decision that the LEA and private school will discuss when technology would not be in use if it is purchased with the CARES Act funding. If an LEA does not have a private school within its boundaries, but has students, is the LEA required to address the CARES Act with the private school students outside the boundary? The answer is no. You only provide services to the private school students and private school building that is within your boundaries. If technology is purchased with ESSER funds, will private schools be able to continue using the equipment in future years? No. The equipment is the property and under title from the LEA. So the private school will not be able to keep any equipment after the grant has ended. Okay. It is true that the LEA and the private school can have different enrollment dates. You have that conversation during consultation. And the date in which you are calculating students, whatever that date is, if it's September 1st, then you're looking at students that are age 5 on September 1st. If they are 4 on September 1st, you would not count them. If we have a 3-year-old and 4-year-old class in the private school building and you go up to ages 13, can you count the 3 and 4-year-olds? The answer is no. You only count students that are age 5 through 17 in a building with more than preschool age. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about my role. The ombudsman role is to ensure that the LEA is actually signing off and working with the private school on the affirmation of consultation for each participating private nonprofit school. So if there are 5 participating private schools within the district, the LEA will submit 5 different affirmations with the 5 participating school names, with each school on an affirmation. And they will need to keep outreach documentation as well. They must monitor and enforce the requirements of, the ombudsman must monitor and enforce the requirements of the CARES Act. And so one of the things that an LEA and a private school should be doing is ensuring that they're working well and collaborating well together, and that they're trying to work out any disagreements they have among one another, and ensuring that they're keeping documents, that the district is providing a timeline of different dates of when things must be submitted to the LEA if they are using services under the CARES Act. The state must provide notice of the grants to the private nonprofit school officials, and that is posted on our TEA website. And we must ensure equitable services occurs. If there is a complaint, an official complaint that is substantiated regarding the validity, regarding the CARES Act, and the private school will need to receive services from an education service center or another provider, then we would follow the TEA procedures for offering PMP equitable services upon request. I will say that has not happened at this point. Thankfully, the LEAs and private schools have worked together to be able to come to a common agreement in being able to receive services as a private nonprofit school. So hopefully that will continue to occur. Okay. Right now, I am going to ask that all participants go to your slido.com, SLIDO.com. There are going to be a couple of questions there. I'm going to give you time to answer them now. Go under the live poll section. The first question is, must the PMP school be located within the LEA boundaries to receive services? And you will answer yes or no. And I do need everyone to be able to answer that question, please. So I'm going to give you time to do that. And you may see a blank screen for just a few moments on the PowerPoint slide. But go ahead and answer that question, please. Okay, there is a second question that has been open in the polls now. If you go back to your Slido poll, the second question is, must an LEA offer equitable services under the CARES Act program to students and teachers in all private nonprofit schools within its boundaries? And the question, the answers are yes or no. If you could please go into the Slido poll under live polls. That poll has been activated for you to respond yes or no. I need everyone to go into that poll, please. And if you don't know or remember, take your best guess. Thank you. There are a few comments in the Slido saying that the YouTube link is not working. So if I could have staff check on that for me, please. I don't know if YouTube has went down or not. Thank you.
Link is working.
Thank you. The next question is, must the private nonprofit school have participated in the past with equitable services? And that is in order to continue with the CARES ESSER services. The answer is yes or no. Please make your best guess in the polls. Thank you to everyone that is participating in the polls. Okay, I see that poll is starting to slow down a little bit. I'll leave it up just a few more moments. And then the last question I'm going to need you to answer once I switch polls in a few seconds is, may a PNP school retain equipment and property once the grant ends? Yes or no? So those are just 4 quick questions. We can only show one poll at a time with this system. So if you missed one of the questions, that would be why. After this poll, I will go back to activating the attendance poll so that you can log in. And then I'll go over questions again. As you're logging in questions or answering that last poll, I will go ahead and start answering some more questions that have been posted. Is there a list of equitable services for private nonprofits? I'm assuming that maybe you're talking about the use of funds that a private nonprofit school may use. And that is on a couple of the slides under use of funds. And it's also in the statute under the CARES Act, ESSER section 18003. There are 12 allowable use of funds. And if you have questions about specific use of funds that you're not sure if it fits in one of those categories, as you're meeting with the LEA, you'll be able to share your concerns and questions with them, and they would be able to answer your questions. The other place, which I'll show you a little bit later, is where where it's actually posted to get a list of the Q&As that are already public. You will have access to these slides later in the week to be able to go back. If you missed something on the slide, you'll have access to be able to go back and review that particular slide. There is not a 75% rule. Someone asked the question, does the 75% rule apply to PMPs? That was an example that I was using only. So in that particular example for calculating services, the public school had 75% of the enrollment. So that's why they had 75% of the funding. and it generated what was remaining 25% of the total enrollment was private school students. And so that's why the private school students, schools would receive 25% of the ESSER CARES funding. There's a question about, can a PMPs purchase plexiglass? If you purchase plexiglass to install, it would have to come down in September 2022. So would that be the best use of funding? Okay, I'm going to go back to put up the attendance record. Okay, what I put up now for you to respond to, what best describes your role? Are you a private nonprofit school official, an LEA, ESC staff member, TEA, private or consultant for the LEAs, or a consultant that works with private nonprofit or community member or parent? If you could complete that. Okay, I'm going to move on from this poll because I want to share some good news with you as we dwindle down in time. There is a new TEA PMP News Bulletin that has been created, and within this bulletin, there will only be, let me back up, there will only be news that are related to private nonprofit and equitable services. So for example, when the CARES private nonprofit affirmation is released, there will be a bulletin that goes out to say, this is released, this is where it is on our website for you to be able to download it. Any information that would be information a private nonprofit school would want to know, or the public or an LEA would want to know regarding equitable services, they would be able to sign up for this subscription. And I'm going to show you how you will sign up. Right now, this first slide is just going to give you what the details are written. You are going to go to the Texas Education Agency updates page, and I'm going to walk you through that in a few minutes. You'll choose the subscription type. You can either subscribe by getting a text or an email. And so you would put your information in there, and then you'll have a list of available topics that TEA regularly sends emails or text messages out to anyone who signs up and subscribes to that particular list. If you scroll to the very bottom, it's going to say Texas Schools as a heading, which is near the bottom of that list. You will check the box that says private nonprofit schools and click submit. That will put you on the TEA listserv for PMP news that will come out. So here it is visually. You're going to sign up for updates on the TEA website. It's at the top. And then you will go to, this page will open up to say how you want to subscribe, email, or by text message. And so if it's email, you'll put your email address there and you would click on submit. If it was through text message, you would enter what your cell phone number is and click submit. The next step would be to sign up for under the Texas Schools will be a heading. It'll be a long list of various news bulletin opportunities. And so to get the information specifically about private nonprofit equitable services, you will go down under Texas Schools, and then you would check the box next to private nonprofit schools and click submit. Once you click submit, then you will automatically be subscribed to any of the information that I or the department, the agency sends out that would be in regards to private nonprofit equitable services. So I would highly suggest that if you're interested in receiving information in that area, that you would check that box. Um, and you can look and see what other topics are on that on the news bulletin up above, so that if you want to get every announcement of a grant that comes out, you can click on that. You can go back in and change your subscription. So that is how we get information out to the field, so that they know what is coming or what's available or where to go in relation to that particular item. I'm also going to share the resources. I've talked about the CARES Act Equitable Services Guidance. And this is a copy of that front page of it. And you'll have the link to be able to click on when we go into that. But this is the published guidance that was updated June 4th that has a lot more questions about the CARES Act that is specifically related to private nonprofit. So a lot of the questions that you're posing in the Slido today, if I am not able to, I won't be able to address every question due to time constraints, but then some of the other questions that are there that I do not have an answer for, it will go through our task force. And then it would show up on this document, and it would show updated as of whatever the new date is. And so when it is updated, you will receive a message through that listserv to say, the CARES Act Equitable Services document has been updated as of June 20th or whatever the date is. So you will know there are new questions and responses on that guidance, and you'll be able to go in and look at that guidance, because it could change on a weekly basis. And I will show you how to get to that at the end as well. You'll have the link for all the CARES Act frequently asked documents. The ones that have private nonprofit equitable services questions and answers are going to show up with the red arrow next to it. The federal funding and grants FAQ, that is going to cover any of the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, Q&As related to that particular act, which is different from CARES in regards to private schools and equitable services. So that is one of the guidances that you will want to review on a regular basis. Off to the side, the June 4th, that lets you know it was last updated June 4th. The next document that has private nonprofit equitable service questions in it will be the CARES Act funding and expense reimbursement FAQ. And then the third one that's specific to only private nonprofit equitable services is the FAQ document that you can see there. And then we have the CARES entitlement amounts by LEA, which is the last document there that is already posted, and I showed you that a little earlier. We only have about 10 minutes left for the session, so I'm going to go through resources pretty quickly. We have a TEA PMP webpage, and then the CARES and the COVID, that's where you're going to find all the FAQs and those that are going to be related to private nonprofit equitable services. The Texas Private School Accreditation Commission, they do list the schools that are accredited under their organization on their site. They may not have every school on there yet that's accredited. And then we have the International Association of Learner-Driven Schools that also has some of the accredited schools that are listed on their website. Again, The school does not have to be accredited. It could just be licensed, or it could be following the rules of the state law. Been open prior to March 13th, and also be a private nonprofit school. And then there are some USDE guidance websites that I have included here for resources as well. I want to make sure I put up my, don't forget the attendance poll. If you are attending this session, then please make sure that you go in and you enter your attendance. It looks like we have about 45% of our audience today is LEA staff. We have 49% that are private nonprofit staff. And we have a few educational service center staff and private nonprofit consultants and private consultants that provide support. Okay, I'm going to put up the attendance poll. If you have not had a chance to sign in, once you sign in, those are going to be the people that receive this PowerPoint. So please make sure you put your name and where you're coming from there, and you will receive a copy of the PowerPoint slides by the end of the week. Because if you're listed there, you would have had to enter your email on our Zoom meeting link to get the link. I'm going to put up my contact information. If you have questions following this meeting or after you review the slides, you can send questions to my email, which is pnpombudsman@tea.texas.gov. You can also contact if you're a private school, you can contact your local education agency, the district in which your private school campus resides. They will be able to assist you in answering questions. If you're working specifically with an education service center as a private school, then you would seek your counsel from them. As always, you can send questions to the PNP Ombudsman mailbox. Please know that that is a very active mailbox lately with the CARES Act questions coming in. And as I said, if it's a brand new question, that question must go through our task force. So it could be a while before you actually see an answer to that question. If you sign up for the news bulletin for private nonprofit equitable services, then you will know when there are new questions that are posted, because I will send out a bulletin to say there are new questions in the on the FAQ. So I wanted to be able to share that. The other thing that I wanted to share is our website, and I will add that to the direct link to this slide. But when you get the slides, you'll be able to click on our website to be able to see where our website is. But due to time, I'm going to try and answer just a few more questions before we end. And thank you for everyone that is entering your attendance record so that you can get a copy of the PowerPoint. Okay, one of the questions is, will you be providing a copy of the questions and answers that are showing up in here? The Q&As that have not had a response through the leadership team, those Q&As will show up on the CARES FAQs that are posted on our website. You may not find a website that shows every private school that is open and available. And so that's why, as an LEA, you will need to do a search and try and show that you have exhausted efforts. You have really tried to search for those private schools by posting ads, by sharing information within the community through your school, so that you can try and get the word out about private nonprofit, so that they can know who to contact and be able to start with consultation. The PowerPoint slides for this private nonprofit meeting training session will be shared. I will also be sharing the basic private nonprofit equitable services 101 session that occurred on June 1st. You will also receive those slides as well. I do not have a sample ad for an LEA to be able to use, but if you check with your Education Service Center, they may have something that you could use, or you can call me and we can talk through a way to post some information. You can post information for private nonprofit schools on your district website. However, that should not be the only place that you post the information, because they may not know to go to your website. If I'm a brand new private school, I don't even know what to do to receive services. And so that's why it's important that the LEA reaches out as much as you can. If the private school is not on the list under TEPSAC or any of the other lists, you need to ensure that you have the private school present their proof to you. It's the burden of proof is on the private school to show that they are eligible for CARES services. For anyone that is on the YouTube, you can go to Slido, which is www.slido.com, in a second window, and then you can open the Slido to be able to respond to the attendance record and any questions by typing PMP Cares as the event code. That will get you into the Slido document. I will leave the live poll open for attendance records so that you can do that after this meeting ends. Oh, someone asked, am I going to give answers to the 4 questions that I asked? And yes, I can do that. Let me go back to the questions, because I had you to answer the question, but I did not give you the answer. Okay. The first question was, must the private nonprofit school be located within the LEA boundaries to receive services? The answer is yes. For CARES, the private school must reside within the LEA boundaries to receive services. Second question, must an LEA offer equitable services under the CARES Act programs to students and teachers in all private nonprofit schools within its boundaries? The answer is yes to all participating private schools within their boundaries. Must a private school have participated in the past with equitable services? The answer is no. This could be the very first time that the private school is seeking services, and they can request services for the first time through CARES. And the last question was, may a private nonprofit school retain equipment and property once the grant period is over? And the answer is no. And you do have all of those questions and answers on a slide. So once you get the slides, you'll be able to go back through that. One of the questions is, does a third-party contractor have to follow EDGAR requirements when they order on behalf of the private nonprofit school? And LEA would, and third-party would need to follow the EDGAR rules. If you received a Zoom invite but had to use YouTube because of the capacity, will you still get the slides? Yes, if you enter your attendance in the PMP Cares live poll, you will still get the slides. If for some reason you don't receive the slides, then send an email to PNP Ombudsman if we left your name off by chance. Can you share more about professional development? Is there a catalog we can select from? Professional development is any training opportunities that are available that would meet the needs of that private school staff. And that is something where you would work with the district, because depending upon the training, there are some trainings that are not allowable. If they are 100% religious based content, that would not be allowable. If it is traveling out of state, depending upon the training and the travel location, that is something you will discuss during consultation with your district. One of the questions is, as a PNP, usually you cannot use the services for previously existing programs. That is true under ESSA, but under the CARES Act, there is no supplant rule. So you can use the CARES Act for things that were previously received through using the CARES Act funding for equitable services. As a private nonprofit school, you cannot purchase items on behalf of the LEA. The LEA is the one that purchases the items for the private school to use. So you cannot make a purchase and then ask the LEA to reimburse you, because the LEA cannot provide funding to the private school. The private school and the LEA will work on what the technology rules will be. They will need to work on assurances and what kind of requirements will be in place if technology is used, including, you know, if it's broken, if it's stolen, if it doesn't work, if something happened to that particular equipment. And that is something that the LEA and the private school will work out and have something in writing before they actually started the purchase. We're coming to an end. I know there are a lot more questions that were not answered, and I'm sorry if I did not get to your particular question. As I said, all questions and answers that go through the task force will be posted online. And I want to thank you for joining our session today and participating in the polls that were set. Again, if you have questions as a private nonprofit, your LEA will be there to assist you. Be patient with them as they arrange consultation time. You can also send questions to my email address, pnpombudsman@tea.texas.gov. If you are an LEA, you may receive services from your Education Service Center, or if you're working with a private consultant. Thank you for all of your assistance and help as we went through the service today. You may receive another survey through email to give additional feedback for this meeting today. And I will leave the live poll open for you to report your attendance if you were on YouTube. Thank you and have a great day.